Welcome everybody. Really nice to have you with us today. Thanks for joining. Apologies for the delayed start. I've been having some technical issues with my IT here, and you might experience a little bit of disruption to the PowerPoint as a result of a workaround that I'm having to put in place, but I don't think it's going to cause much disruption. I'll introduce myself properly, and then we'll get on to the aims of the session in a second. So my name is Tim Lawrence. I'm the Edexcel Subject Advisor for International Science Qualifications. So I advise teachers around the world and in the UK who are teaching International GCSE and International A-Level Sciences. I'm not actually part of the assessment team, so I'm not an examiner. I don't take part in the writing of new papers, and that's important because in the UK we have a regulation that says that those exam board employees who are actually involved in the production of new papers can't deliver this kind of training direct to teachers to ensure the security of those future papers. So it may be that you have some questions today that I need to refer to that team who are actually involved in the production of the papers. I'll be making notes of those, and I'll be talking about how you can stay in touch with me and how you can find out the answers to those questions later on in the presentation. As Leon said, please do use the chat box if you're having any difficulties with any of the technology. Then Leon will be able to help you with that. If you have any questions which come up, which you'd like me to address, please put them in that chat box as well. And every a sort of few minutes at the end of each section of my presentation, I'll be checking the chat box and responding as best I can to those questions. The slide deck that you have in your delegate pack is not actually the slide deck that I'm going to be presenting from today. So apologies for that. It was intended to be, but that's part of the technical difficulty that I'm battling with. So what you have there is an exam insights presentation. Some of you may have already seen it. It's based on the linear exams from last May and June, but we're going to be referring to a bit of the advice and guidance that came up in those trainings because it's relevant to your modular students. So here we are talking about the first International Science Modular GCSE exam series for chemistry. And the aims and objectives of our session are to, first of all, review key features of the modular specification and assessments, which many of you will be familiar with, but I think it's important that we just refresh some of that information, which is taken partly from the training that we ran last summer to prepare you for this transition to the modular course, but with a bit more of a focus on what it means for students sitting that first set of exams. Then we'll review the assessment objectives, command words, and the mathematical skills which are assessed, and consider how these might be useful for teachers to have in mind as you go into your final lessons preparing students for their first set of exams. We'll have a look at the free resources and past training content on our website and think about which of those might be particularly useful to you as you prepare students for exams. And lessons, as I said, from the last linear exam series, because we don't have a past exam series for modular, this being the first one. But because the question styles will be the same command words, the same style of mark schemes, there are some very helpful resources which we can refer to there. There'll be some opportunity at the end for the further questions and answers. And hopefully, if you have any good ideas that you would like to share, we can have a little bit of that as well. But I'll be talking about another way that you can interact with other teachers and share ideas and resources with them as well coming up. The event is scheduled for an hour and a half from our side, but I saw this morning actually that I think it might only be listed as a 1 hour event on our training website. So if you're only expecting it to be an hour, don't worry. The same link that you used to join will access a recording in the next few days when that's been edited and uploaded. And so you can always come back later to catch anything that you've missed. And the main part of my presentation should be more or less done in an hour. So a recap quickly of the whole modular pathway and how it differs from the linear route. This is true for all of our GCSE subjects. Unit assessments can be taken over multiple exam series now, of course, and we have a November as well as a June exam series. The November series, actually, the exams are in October and November, just as the June series exams begin in May and finish in June. There's no tier of entry. That means no higher or foundation papers to worry about. Some of you will be familiar with the UK GCSEs, where we have foundation papers with less challenging questions, which only access the grades up to 5. But for the international GCSE, both modular and linear, there's just one tier of entry. On the exam series, by the way, I should have said there was no November series in 2024. This coming one is the first, but there will thereafter be a November series for both modules as well as the June series. We have a uniform mark scale. Now, if you teach international A-level Edexcel, then you'll be familiar with that most likely. It's a system for translating the raw mark on the exam paper into a scale mark, which is then the thing that contributes to their final grade. The formula for converting it is unique to each exam paper, and it's set by the examiners once they've marked all the papers, and it's effectively how they set the grade boundaries for that paper. So when your students get their results, you and they will see a uniform mark as well as a raw mark, and it's the uniform mark which means that whichever exam series they sit in, whether they resit, it will fairly contribute to their overall grade. Students can resit individual units in any exam series. We've had questions from biology and physics teachers about resits, so I'll give you the answers to those frequently asked questions now. Students can actually resit any number of times they choose. In most cases, I expect 3 sittings is the most that you would enter students for, because it's designed to be a 2-year course and you have the November and the June opportunities, but potentially they could resit again in the following year. And when they cash in for a final grade, it's the best of their last 2 attempts which counts for each unit, and that's automatically calculated for them. So the advice that comes from that is, if you do have students wanting to resit so that they have a 3rd attempt, then if they've actually got worse on their 2nd attempt than their original, then you need to explain to them that if they do worse again, they could actually lose their best mark from the 1st attempt. So that rule is there to discourage students from repeatedly resitting again and again in hope of improving, which isn't really the idea of the course. It's designed so that if they have a bad day, if they underperform on a particular unit, they get the chance to resit it. So it's the best of the last 2 sittings that count. Once they have all of their unit results, then a cash-in entry is needed, as well as any paper entries, which the exams officer makes, and that then generates their grade. So a typical modular journey, other ways that this could be worked, but most likely students would have started learning the modular course content last September, although because it's exactly the same content as for the linear international GCSE chemistry, it is possible that you could have started teaching a year earlier and still be entering students for exams now. The 21st of March coming up soon is the deadline for making entries, avoiding late fees for the May-June series. They sit exams in May and June, most likely just Unit 1. August the 21st will be results day. In September, you'll continue delivering the course, moving on to the Unit 2 content. Then there's the November opportunity to resit if they wanted to, or they could complete the course in November, for that matter, sitting Unit 2. Again, there's a deadline in March for the summer entries. And sorry, slight technical hitch. My PowerPoint presentation seems to be frozen. let me go back and relaunch that. Apologies. Here we go. most likely then sitting their Unit 2 exam in May and June of 2026, and being finally certificated, receiving their grade along with their final result in August of 2026. But there are several other pathways through that which you might be taking, which I'll recap in a second. In case you're talking now to parents and students about the reasons for this change, why are you taking the modular pathway? These are benefits as we see them. An important one that schools around the world are increasingly focused on is the benefits for students of spreading their assessment over 2 years rather than having all of their exams in one go. More opportunities for them to demonstrate their skills, and the opportunity to resit if they need it, rather than being punished unduly for having one bad day in the exam hall. You as teachers will have that additional benefit of rich data on your students that comes from actually sitting a real exam marked by examiners, so you'll have really accurate data as to where they are to inform your teaching next year. Pressure ease on exams officers and parents if they have to pay for exam fees as well. So several benefits to the modular pathway. Here's a quick overview of all of the qualifications that we have now for GCSE Science. So some of you will be entering for the double award, and there's a reminder there of various resources that we have available to you, but I expect that you are familiar with those. If you're doing the double award, then the chemistry units, remember, are called units 3 and 4, whereas if you're doing the separate chemistry GCSE, then they're units 1 and 2. Here we have an example of how you might have different sort of routes through the qualification in different schools, or possibly for different students within the same school. So it might be that they sit unit 1 at the end of year 10, or you might call it grade 9 this year, and unit 2 next year. It might be that you give them a unit 1 resit opportunity in November, as per example 2 here, or it may be that you also enter them for unit 2 in November, as we've already said, and unit 2 in year 11. They could sit both unit 1 and 2 in November of year 11. So there's really very many options that you could explore moving forward, whatever works best in your particular context for your students, which is the strength of the modular pathway, the flexibility it gives you. Okay, this is an important slide, and I'll just pause here and give you a little bit of time to digest this and think about it. You might want to have a look at the specification, which is in the delegate pack for you to download in the resources section of the Zoom menu. But here we have the split for unit 1 and unit 2 chemistry. And the one really big change that you need to make sure that you and all the other teachers and all of your students are fully engaged with is that they must have covered all of the unit 1 content, obviously, for this unit 1 exam. The extraction and uses of metals is there in bold, because this is the only one of those subtopics in unit 1 that is a purely separate chemistry topic, although within the other subtopics there will be content which in the specification is in bold with a C after the code number, which you don't have to cover for double award students, but it can all be assessed for the separate chemistry candidates. That's another difference from linear. If you were familiar with the linear course, then the paper 1 would only cover the contents that was common to double award and separate chemistry. But now every exam for separate chemistry can assess all of the content. So you need to, again, just double check that all of that content has been covered. Periodic table and chemical formulae, equations and calculations comes up in both. So that needs to be sort of refreshed for the unit 2. Okay, I'll just pause there and have a look at the chat and answer a few questions if you have them before we move on in a couple of minutes. Okay, let me answer a couple of questions in the chat. So Edexcel will keep modular and linear routes available in the future. So you will continue to have the choice. Um, it's even possible to enter some students in your centre for linear and some students for modular. And there are no plans currently to remove the linear route. That may change in the future when the international GCSEs are completely refreshed, but there are no plans, there's no timescale in place for that to happen anytime soon. So several questions about the fact that some specification statements are in bold. If you only teach separate international GCSE chemistry, if you're not involved in double award, then it's quite simple. You need to teach all of the content on the specification, and it makes no difference if you're only teaching chemistry GCSE. It makes no difference whether the statement is in bold with a C after the specification code number. You can't see the code numbers, by the way, on this slide, but if you go to the specification, to the main part of the specification, which lists the content to be taught in detail, you'll see that each line has a code number and some of those have a C. Now, if you teach double award chemistry, that's our double award science is our GCSE course, which covers biology, chemistry, physics, 2/3 of the content of the separate GCSEs. Because they've done 2/3 of all three subjects, it amounts to 2 GCSEs. Hence, it's called double award science. They receive a double grade, like a grade 9/9 is the top grade, 9/8 is the second highest, 8/8 is the next highest, and so on. So if you're teaching that course, then you only need to teach 2/3 of the content, and it's the bold topics that you see on this slide. And within those topics, the bold specification statements with the C, which you don't need to cover because they're not assessed in the double award course. So I hope I've made that a little clearer. So if there's no stars next to the statement at all, then it will only appear in the paper that it's shown in. And it will appear in both the double award and the separate chemistry for those papers. Sample materials are available as a question about those I see here. And in fact, the sample assessments are in the delegate pack that you can download. They can also be downloaded from the qualification webpage. There is just one set at the moment. A second set is being written and will be published, I believe, in August. So apologies that there won't be a second set of sample assessments available before this first exam series, but they are coming. And as we'll discuss later, all of the linear past papers, of which there are many, are relevant to your students in terms of developing their exam technique and practicing answering exam questions, because the style of question has not changed and exactly the same type of question will be asked. It's really just the division of the topics which is new. So an interesting question here, which I have had recently from another teacher, about the fact that ionic and covalent bonding appear in Unit 2, and yet you need to teach formulae and equations and calculations as part of Unit 1. Now, I don't think that there is going to be any adjustment to the specification regarding this. The feedback is useful, and I will certainly pass it on to my colleague who's responsible for reviewing and potentially updating the specification. But my own view is that this is a real challenge with chemistry in particular, more so than for physics and biology, where I think the topics tend to be more standalone. And as you will all know very well, in chemistry, there is a great deal of linking of concepts across different topics. So if you want a modular course, you have to make some difficult decisions about how you're going to separate it into two. And as you've seen, we've we've kept a balance of inorganic, physical, and organic chemistry between the papers, which has its benefits, but that does mean that you have some hard choices to make when splitting some of these concepts. So my suggestion is that it might be beneficial to students early on in the course to have some understanding of ionic and covalent bonding, reassure them that they won't be specifically assessed on this, but you don't have to completely delay your teaching of it. You can introduce concepts to them. It might benefit them greatly to have met them more than once in the progress of the course. The external exam, is it still paper-based or screen-based, is an interesting question. So on-screen assessments where students actually view the exam paper on screen and submit their answers electronically into the computer are a new development that's being piloted and extended currently. In general, these are going to be traditional papers only to the vast majority of schools around the world. But the on-screen assessment is being rolled out to an increasing number of schools. So it's possible that some of you who are taking part in this training today might be working in an online school or a school that is involved in our rollout of on-screen assessment. But in general, it's still paper-based for the majority. Let me just have a quick look to see if I've missed any important questions here. Apologies if I do miss one. Do please ask your question again. And there's one about the calculation of final grades. What I might do is come back to that at the end because it is a little complicated, but I can make a note and I can share with you via my next subject update an explainer. I might actually make a short video that takes you through how the UMS works and how the calculation of grades works. That might be better than trying to do it today without the best visual aids. Thank you, Aya, for reposting this one. Unit 1 exam, will it only cover the specification under Unit 1? That is correct. So that's what makes this course modular. So the Unit 1 exam can only ask questions which are on the topics that you see on the left here, and you don't need to have covered the topics on the right, as long as students have all the concepts they need to answer these ones. And I think the specimen paper is good to look at to address that. Is it the same for Unit 2, as in, do students only need to revise the Unit 2 content for that? This was a really good question that I had on Monday, and I queried it with a colleague in our assessment team who said that he would like to double check that, because if you're familiar with international A-levels, then they have synoptic elements, so that, for example, when students are taking the second year units, what we call IA2 units, they need to revise concepts from their first year A-level units. Now, there is nothing in the specification which explicitly states that for international GCSE. So my understanding is no, they don't need to revise Unit 1 content for their Unit 2 exam. The Unit 2 exam will only assess what you see on the right. But I am going to get final confirmation of that because we need to be absolutely sure we're giving you the correct advice. And as I said earlier, I'm not involved in the actual production of the papers. So I mentioned earlier, we had another question about sample assessments, that more sample assessments are being written, but they won't be ready before this exam series. That is standard for new assessment routes. And in many ways, we are in a better position with this one than we would be for a brand new GCSE, because we do have all the linear papers to refer to for guidance. But I appreciate that for that question about synoptic questions in Unit 2, which draw on Unit 1 knowledge, sample assessments would be really useful for that. As I said, I will get final confirmation and I will share that with you in a subject update. I'm going to return to the question about the blast furnace later because we need to get a bit further through the presentation. There was a question about math skills that's coming up soon in a section of my presentation, so I will save that until I get there. Let me talk to you quickly about assessment objectives and command words. This is standard across the GCSE science subjects, and there's no change from the linear, but I think it is a good time just to remind ourselves of these. So assessment objective 1, knowledge and understanding of chemistry. So this is really about the recall of factual knowledge, including that which is related to practical methods, but not around designing or improving. AO1 is purely about their recall of knowledge. It's approximately 40% of the marks available. And this is obviously what we focus on greatly as teachers. And the big message really I have is to make sure that your students are aware that it is only 40% of the overall mark for AO1. AO2, application of knowledge and understanding, is another 40%. So this is, I think, a little bit more challenging for us to teach. It's where practicing past paper exam questions is extremely useful to build students' confidence and skills with this. And so we'll look more about how you can use our free resources to do that using the linear paper questions later on in this session. And AO3, which is the final approximately 20%, experimental skills, analysis, and evaluation of data and methods. So making judgments, drawing conclusions, developing and improving experimental procedures, a challenging skill for lots of students, and one that I think really benefits from teachers modeling how to approach that kind of exam question and how to understand what the mark schemes are looking for. So final slide in this section is about the command words, sorry, the keywords in the questions which guide students to what skills they're looking for. And this is just a list taken from the appendix in the specification. So you may want to, as I pause here, just have a quick look at the specification and find Appendix 4, which has a definition of each of these command words. And I would just invite you to consider and put in the chat if you'd like to share your thoughts why these 4 are in bold. Comment on, discuss, evaluate and justify, not very clearly emboldened, but have a look at those and think, why are they singled out on this slide? Okay, thank you. Very good answer in the chat. Um, just posted. Thank you very much for that. Yes, these command words, comment on, discuss, evaluate, and justify, are actually all linked to AO3. If I just go back a slide in my presentation, this interpretation and evaluation, making judgments and draw conclusions. You're quite right. This is a deeper level of thinking, far beyond simple recall or description. And so they are the kinds of question which are particularly good at discriminating the stronger candidates. So if you have students who are aiming for top grades, it's good as part of your revision work with them to get them to have a look at some of those questions. In the linear examiner reports, you will find examples of student answers with examiner commentary. And I think it's particularly useful to look at that for your students taking these first modular exams, because many of them will be taking this exam a year earlier. And it's a great benefit to them, having only half the course to revise rather than 2 years of work in chemistry. As we've already discussed, there are several other advantages to do with spreading their assessment out through the course. And that's all the positives. But one thing to bear in mind is that they are a year less far through their educational journey. Their skills in terms of this kind of analytical writing, which they will be developing in other subjects, are a little less developed. And you might want, therefore, to particularly focus them on the demands of these kinds of questions in their preparations. Just having a quick look at other questions. So I think regarding detail of blast furnaces and the extraction of aluminium, I did actually have a question recently, which I referred to one of our senior examiners just to be sure of getting the absolute correct answer to that level of detail that you need. And so I won't attempt to recall that right now, but I will put that in my frequently asked questions document, and I'll explain shortly how you can make sure that you're signed up to receive that when I publish it. Questions about why topics have been split between Unit 1 and Unit 2. And as I said, the course has been designed so that the inorganic, organic, and physical chemistry is split between the 2 units, which I think has some clear benefits. But that means it's inevitable that you have to split things. That's part of the design of any modular course. And if you don't like it, then you have the option of the linear course, or you can still take the modular route, but you can enter students for both exams at the end of the course. And I think personally that is just the choice that you have as teachers and as a school, and you have to decide which is best for your students in your context. So I think there was one other question, which is a more straightforward one. How many exams do students need to sit? Well, that's simple, because whether they are taking the separate chemistry GCSE, or for that matter, the double award, they still have 2 chemistry exams. So it's called Unit 1 and Unit 2 for the separate chemistry, or Unit 3 and Unit 4 if they're doing double award, because they have 6 units, 2 biology, 2 chemistry, 2 physics, but it's always 2 exam papers. Okay, let's move on to have a look at mathematical skills. Thank you to whoever asked the question about this. I think it's a very good one to focus on. A similar reason to my reason just now for why you might want to focus on AO2 and AO3 questions in your revision, because students have had a year less of studying mathematics, whether they're doing International GCSE or some other course. They've had a year less of encountering mathematical skills in their chemistry and their biology and their physics lessons as well. But all of these mathematical skills, which are listed again in an appendix in the specification, they can all be assessed in both Units 1 and Unit 2. So Therefore, I think it's important to consider whether they are familiar with all of these. It may be useful to talk to colleagues in your school who teach mathematics about whether they have covered all of these topics by the time your students will sit this exam, and any they haven't, you might want to give them some input into. So the specification appendix is divided into arithmetic and numerical computation as the first section, decimals, standard form, ratios, fractions, percentages, powers, and roots. Then handling data. These are very similar, by the way, for biology and physics. There are a few small differences. Using an appropriate number of significant figures, calculating the mean, constructing and interpreting bar charts, probability, modes and medians, scatter diagrams, identifying trends, and making order of magnitude calculations. Algebra, and actually there's no geometry, forgive me, that's a heading that I should have deleted geometry from, because in the biology and physics exams there's some basic geometry content in the maths list, but not for chemistry. So they just need to understand these symbols, be able to change the subject of an equation, substitute into equations, and solve simple algebraic equations, which I think you would naturally cover when teaching those topics that involve equations. And finally, for graphs, understanding y equals mx plus c, which they will certainly have encountered in their mathematics education, translating information between graphs and numerical form, plotting variables from experimental or other data, determining the slopes and intercepts of graphs, so calculating gradients, and also using the tangent of a curve to measure rate of change, which is obviously an important concept in chemistry when it comes to rates. Okay, let me just pause there for a second and I'll have another look at your questions. Really interesting question. Thank you, Cornell, about certificates if your students are taking a mixture of linear and modular Edexcel GCSEs. My belief, but I will seek to confirm this, is that they will get all of their results on one certificate, whether they've taken modular or linear in their various subjects. As long as they've taken them all with Edexcel, I think that all of the grades will appear on a single certificate. But let me check that. Interesting one. Yes, I don't think it's a strange request particularly, Ada, thank you. If students sit a modular unit 1 in their first year, could they then switch to linear in the second year if they preferred to do that? And I can see no reason why not. Again, I will double check this, but I'm pretty certain there's nothing to stop them doing that. They wouldn't have a modular grade unless they sat unit 2 and certificated. There is a rule that says you can't enter students for modular and linear exams in the same exam series. But as this would be different exam series, there wouldn't be a problem with that, I don't think. So the rule that they can't do both is because, like all exam boards, we have regulations which prevent students from effectively being assessed on the same content for two different qualifications. So for the same reason, you couldn't enter them for both double award and separate chemistry exams in the same exam series, because they would be being assessed on the same content in both exam. They could get 5 GCSEs in science rather than 3 for no extra learning effectively. So you can't do that. But in a following year, then you can switch them from separate to double or from modular to linear. But yes, let me just get a final confirmation of that as part of my frequently asked questions update. Okay, I'm going to move on to talk to you quickly about free resources that you can access on our website. And a couple of my slides here are actually taken from my physics presentation because of the technical difficulties that I've had this morning. But I don't think it will affect the clarity of the message. So you can see this says physics, but the chemistry qualification webpage looks virtually identical to this. The link to it is in your delegate pack. And what I wanted to show with this slide was the location of this teaching and learning materials link, which on a fairly busy web page you might miss. But most of these resources I'm just about to show you are to be found there, and more will be added all the time. So if you compare this web page to the linear version, there are more resources there, but it's worth continuing to check and signing up to our updates, because that's how you will be notified that we've put new resources there for you to use. You'll see my face on this slide. There's the teachingscience@pearson.com email address that you can contact me on, the phone number for our teaching services team, and if they can't answer your questions, they will generally then refer those to me. There's a link at the bottom of this slide you can see that says sign up for subject advisor updates, and I would strongly encourage you to do that if you haven't already. Monthly updates are written by my colleague Irene, who some of you will know, who now focuses mainly on UK GCSEs, A levels and BTECs for science, but much of her information is relevant to you as international teachers, so you'll receive those. And she will link to any international specific news items that I write. There's also a link, not actually visible in this screenshot, but just below there, that allows you to book a Teams call with me if you'd like to have a video conversation, which is often useful because I can then show you resources on screen that can help answer your questions about your teaching. So please do make that use of that free service as well. So if we go into teaching and learning materials, we then have this series of drop-down menus. And I wanted to highlight these maths and practical support documents. Mainly they're maths in science worksheets, but given the importance of checking that your students are confident with their math skills as part of their revision, I would recommend having a look at those. They're ready to print off and use in the classroom. They're free to you, and so please do have a look at them. Exam Wizard is another free resource, and for this you will need an Edexcel online login. That's because it also gives you access to secure papers, the most recent exam papers, which we want to make as difficult as possible for students to download, to allow you to use them as secure mock exams. So if you don't yet have Exam Wizard account set up, then your exams officer in your school can do that. And although there are no modular past papers, Exam Wizard allows you to search linear past paper questions by modular topic. So that's what this screenshot is illustrating. And if you choose modular 9-1 International GCSE, it then gives you filtering options on the next screen, which are linked to the way Unit 1 and Unit 2 are set up. There's also a maths skill option in the skill drop-down menu, which allows you to search for questions which have focused on math skills. Apologies, again, this screenshot is from the physics version, but I think the point is still illustrated, that you can then dig down through the topic select menu in Exam Wizard, and you can pick out exam questions from linear exams which could be asked in future. The same questions would be equally relevant for the modular topic in question. And that could be very useful because you can basically just filter it to select questions in general that relate to Unit 1 modular chemistry. And that then allows you to export papers that you have constructed with examiner reports and mark schemes. A little on past training contents before I have another quick pause. Again, my screenshots continue to be from the physics webpage, but the same information is there for chemistry. It's in that teaching and learning materials section of the website that I mentioned previously. And we have zip folders which have PowerPoint presentations like this one and other delegate resources for you to download. If we have training videos which relate to recent exam papers which are locked to protect them from students finding them, then you will also find links in past training content to access those. So we'll have exam insight, feedback training in September, October time on these first modular exams, and you can look out for those on our training pages. If you miss them, you'll be able to find links to watch those videos here in past training content in teaching and learning materials. Again, we have a physics screenshot here, but the same information is there for chemistry. You have the link for the chemistry web page, YouTube channel in your delegate booklet, which you can download in resources from this meeting. And do have a look at the past training content which is available there, including getting really ready to teach the modular course. If you haven't already seen that training, I've replicated a little bit of it here. There's more detail that you might want to have a look at. Okay, so we'll have a quick look at some exam insights. I'm going to share a different presentation in a moment and just learn a couple of lessons from the linear chemistry that we've looked at. Some of you will have seen before, but I think it's a good time just to recap. I'll just pause to have a quick look in the chat first, though. Exam Wizard is free, absolutely. You just need to sort your Edexcel online login to allow yourself to log into it. I'll just post the link in the chat in case anyone has not found it. So yes, limited exams in limited papers available for the modular pathway because we only have the one set of sample assessment materials. Really, my top tip is to use Exam Wizard in the way that I have just talked about, because there's a huge number of linear exam questions there. And as I said earlier in the presentation, but some of you may have joined later, the style of exam question will be no different for these modular exams. It's really just that the topic split is new, and Exam Wizard allows you therefore to filter the database of past exam questions just to the Unit 1 modular chemistry content, and then you can quickly construct past papers, not actual past papers, but practice papers, practice assessments to set for students to do for homework, to get them to do as tests in lessons, to practice those exam skills, just to talk through, to demonstrate how to answer them, having looked at the mark scheme and examiner report yourself. So that's my advice. If you can't access Exam Wizard, or if for you it would be simpler, then the other idea you can use is to go to the linear qualification page, look at the past papers available there. My advice is for students doing separate GCSE chemistry, look at the chemistry paper 2 content, the paper 2s, because the paper 1s for the linear course won't assess all of the content that will come up in their modular exam, Unit 1. But if you look at the linear Unit 2s, because those do assess the entire course, then you can delete the questions that won't be relevant because they refer to Unit 2 content and use the questions that refer to Unit 1. Interesting question about Exam Wizard, and that many questions kind of span across different topics. And yes, I appreciate that can be difficult, especially when you want to find a question just to assess one thing. I don't think there's a solution to that, because the point is these are actual past paper questions, and the nature of exam questions is that they will often assess across multiple topics, because that's important in reflecting chemistry itself. So I'm afraid you might be stuck with that and forced just to use parts of questions and to modify them. But one advantage of using Exam Wizard with that in mind is that you can collect together useful questions, export them as a Word document, and then you can delete or modify parts of questions as you see fit to deal with that problem. Okay, I'm just going to switch to a different presentation and we'll have a quick look at some. Actually, no, before I do that, sorry for changing my mind, I'm going to just show you some general feedback which applies to chemistry, which is taken from a number of past examiner reports for linear, and which I think is particularly helpful for you to share with students now. Okay. What have examiners told us about past exam series which can help to guide students with their coming exams? So I mentioned it earlier in my section on assessment objectives, but application of knowledge to unfamiliar, novel, new contexts is a key skill, and really one that I think there's no substitute to practicing past paper questions, to get them to think on their feet, as it were, and to apply their knowledge in a new way. Evaluation, I've also talked about before, those questions which assess AO3. Describe and explain are often confused, so I think this is a simpler thing for you to clarify for them regarding the command words. Describe means that they just need to stick to the facts, whereas explain, there will be points on the mark scheme requiring justification. They need to give reasoning behind their answer. Core practicals are important to revise, just like the theoretical content. Mathematical skills we've already mentioned. All of the scientific terminology listed in the specification, it's worth devoting some revision time to that. And perhaps particularly for these first modular exams, where students have had less time to absorb scientific terminology over 2 years of study. Reading the question carefully and including sufficient points. So looking at the number of marks available for each question. Again, your students taking this exam, they may be 1 year less experienced as students looking at lots of exam paper questions in different subjects. And so certain things which you may have taken for granted, it's worth just saying to them, look, if there's 3 marks available, then you need to try to make 3 points. If there's only 1 mark available, then obviously your answer can be very short. Practicing calculations, really important. Taking care when drawing diagrams. So students' diagrams can often lose marks just because they're rushing. They don't use a ruler carefully, for example. Writing in detail, chemical terminology, that should say, apologies, revising practical work, as we've already said. Some of these are taken from physics and biology papers, as you can see, but the general points are equally relevant to chemistry. Key terms, variables and experiments, and the 6-mark design a study question is there in the sample assessment materials. You may be familiar with it from linear exams. In fact, that could come up in Unit 2 or in Unit 1. There's no guarantee that a particular question style will come up in a particular unit. This is something I have checked with our assessment team in response to a teacher's question. For example, you may know that in linear exams, paper 1 always has the designer study question. Paper 2 always begins with an article that the questions respond to. It's possible that that article question could come up in Unit 1 in the modular. But for those designer study questions, independent variable given clearly and the range of the independent variable, the dependent variable and how it will be measured, control variables and how they will be controlled, all very important and very likely to be assessed in one paper or the other. Reading through the units carefully and attention to units completes that. So I'm just going to stop showing my screen for a second so I can switch to a different presentation, because I just want to show you a bit more exam feedback. And we have a question in your, which has some answers in your delegate pack to have a look at. Okay. Let me just pause slightly longer just to have a quick check in the chat. So, Welkin, thank you very much. I'm so sorry about this issue, which continues to disrupt my smooth presentation. But I've had an IT issue with the packs and the presentation, which I really can't explain. I don't know how I've done it. I presume it's my fault. But the delegate pack may have some physics pages instead of chemistry. I'm so sorry. We'll get the correct resources shared with you via the update that I will send out. I mentioned earlier you can sign up to these updates, and I'll include that with you. So you should have had some chemistry exemplars, but it was only ever intended to be a very short part of this presentation. And I'll show you on the screen what I was going to get you to have a look at in the pack, so you won't actually miss it. And as I said, these are actually lessons from linear exams which have already been shared and some of you will have seen, but I think still some useful lessons. And this is a good example of a multiple choice question which was actually very challenging and students struggled with. So given that formulae a feature in this Unit 1 exam, and as we've already pointed out, formulae is a challenging topic when you haven't done all of the ionic bonding and covalent bonding, which is actually in Unit 2. So let's just have a look at this question and see what we can learn from it. So advice from the senior examiners to candidates is to annotate the charges of the ions and to help them work out this answer, because common mistakes were made around forgetting details of the charges of the ions. So this is the key information that they really need to solve this, along with the concept of the overall charge of the compounds needing to be neutral. Okay, so I just want to look at one more question really. So I'm going to skip forward, particularly because some of these relate to topics which will come up on paper 2. So actually I'll stop sharing, sorry, because otherwise we're going to overwhelm you with flashing slides. So yes, there was an interesting question about drawing energy profiles, and I wanted to just have a little look at this together and draw a lesson from it. Okay. Now this relates to a general piece of exam feedback from the senior examiners regarding the drawing of diagrams. So some information was given on bond energies, and then the reaction profile was asked for with an energy axis being given. So feedback on the first part of this question, which was calculating the delta H. This was more challenging when it came to drawing the energy profiles. Common mistakes: failing to draw their arrows correctly, too long, too short, or no arrowheads. As well as this, many failed to label the reactants and products, or got the formulae or balancing incorrect, with some of them missing the activation energy hump and were therefore limited to 2 marks and could not score all of them. This candidate drew a good diagram, but small mistakes, HCl instead of 2HCl, lost them a mark. So I think it's a really good idea to look at some examiner reports for linear exams with candidates and really draw their attention to details like this that they can learn from. This scored 4 out of 4. All of the formulae represented accurately, whereas this one failed to draw the activation energy hump, and that limited it to 2 marks out of 4. So I'm going to leave the exam feedback section there. We've got a little bit more time left. I've just got a few final slides to go through regarding support available to you. And then there'll be a final few minutes for any final questions that you have. So Results Plus, many of you will be familiar with, having used it for linear GCSE and international A levels. But if you are new to Edexcel, then this is another important free service, access through the same Edexcel online login that will get you into Exam Wizard and allow you to download recent past papers. It allows you to analyze your students' marks and compare them with the whole Edexcel cohort. It's worth pointing out to your students that their exam papers will be scanned and marked on screen by examiners. And this gives you several benefits, including being able to actually see their scanned scripts and the marks that were awarded. But it does mean that candidates need to be careful to write their answers in the correct space on the exam paper. And I think it helps to stress to them that unlike any mock exams that you mark, there won't be an examiner with their physical exam paper flicking through it and spotting if they've written answers on different pages. It's also very important, that reminds me, when they're answering multiple choice questions, that they follow the instructions on the paper and they put a cross through the correct little circle on the exam paper. Sometimes candidates write the correct letter next to the question instead, which if you were marking a mock exam would be fine, but the multiple choice questions are actually marked by computer. And so if they've written the letter or if they've circled the box instead of putting a cross through it, then their answer will most likely not be recognized. And so that's worth stressing to them as well. Exam Wizard we've discussed. Really useful search tool, especially while we are without past papers for the modular. Access to scripts I just mentioned. With your students' permission, you can use this online portal to actually see the answers they've written on their exam scripts and the marks that were awarded after their result has been released, which can be a very useful tool for informing your teaching of subsequent years. Paid for resources are optional. You don't need to buy any of these to deliver the course, but a reminder that we do have textbooks available for the course and teaching hubs online resources that are available. That's what the physics one looks like. The chemistry one is the same with a different picture. Teaching hubs has practice tests and assessments. So if you are struggling for past paper questions, it may be that your school already has access to teaching hubs, but you haven't been given access. It's worth asking that question for additional practice questions. We have very recently, in fact, on Monday of this week, launched a new Facebook group. We've done this for some of our other subjects already, and teachers have responded really well. This is for teachers of international Edexcel science qualifications specifically. I'll just put the link in the meeting chat here because it would be great to have as many of you as possible sign up to it. You have to fill out some questions to make sure that we're not having bots and people just spamming. So you have to agree to the group rules and answer the questions to join. But that's another way that you can keep in touch with me, and I will post answers to some of the questions that I've not directly answered in today's training through that Facebook group. But you can also ask other teachers for tips and advice and share resources, but with a bit of oversight from us, from me, just to make sure that the advice that's given out is accurate. So please do have a look at that. If you use Facebook, or even if you don't, you could create a Facebook account just for that. A few more details about me. Just a reminder that you can contact us by phone or email on those number and email address there, but also on the website you'll find that Teams meeting link to talk to me. So time for questions. Before we finish, let me just have a look at what we've got in the chat. A question about nomenclature of branched hydrocarbon compounds. That's a great question, which I think I will have to just double check, but my short answer is no, I don't think so. I don't think they need to know anything about branching. Let me just see if I can very quickly test that out now. So the specification has understand how to draw the structural and displayed formulae for alkanes with up to 5 carbon atoms in the molecule and to name the unbranched chain isomers. So I think that clarifies that they don't need to know any names of branching hydrocarbons. So chemical formulae, equations, and calculations do appear in both parts 1 and 2, in both Unit 1 and Unit 2. So they need to be familiar with those for their Unit 1 exam. They can take Module 1 and Module 2 in the same year. They can sit them both at the end of the first year of the course. There's nothing from our side to stop you entering them. And both units are available in this coming exam series, and it is possible to complete the course and obtain a grade this August to sit all the units. Yes. I'm just looking at the specification for the section on formulae and equations. So yes, Part E, chemical formulae, equations, and calculations. Understand how the formulae of simple compounds can be obtained experimentally. Let me just double check that. Any additional support for SEN candidates is a really interesting question. You can request modified papers for any students who have a visual impairment. They are produced on demand, as it were. Other types of support, that nothing springs immediately to mind, but let me add that to my list of questions that I'm going to consult with colleagues about. Yes, students can attempt Module 1 and 2 in either year, in any year of the course. Yeah, so the periodic table is topic 1D and chemical formulae, equations, and calculations 1E, which includes writing word equations and balanced chemical equations, including state symbols, for reactions studied in the specification and for unfamiliar reactions where suitable information is provided. That can be assessed in Unit 1 and in Unit 2 for the modular course. Yes, interesting question from Abdul Rahman about drawing and lines of best fit, when to draw a straight line, when to draw a freehand line. I think a good general piece of advice about lines of best fit on graphs is to start with their ruler and see if they can fit a straight line to it. But if they find that at one end of their straight line, at both ends of the straight line, the points are generally above or below, whereas in the middle they're on the other side of their ruler, then that's a sign that it should actually be a curve. So I can't comment on particular past questions, but feel free to email me with any that don't seem to fit that rule. But I think, yes, drawing curves of best fit is something that they should be on the lookout for, and it's a good thing to model for them on the board in your classroom, I think. A question, how to predict the score of the student. I take that question to mean if your school, for your parents, for example, wants you to make a prediction, then I think the best that you can do is give them an exam paper which is either, as we've discussed before, produced using Exam Wizard, where you filter to just the Unit 1 topics that you've already covered, or taking a linear paper 2 and deleting questions, maybe 2 linear paper 2s, and delete the questions where they haven't covered that content. Mark it using the mark scheme, and then use the grade boundaries from the last linear exams. Now, we don't know, we can't know what the grade boundaries will be. It's a frequently asked question that I have for these modular exams, but because they are designed to be as close as possible, of equal difficulty, of equal challenge, with the same style of questions as linear exams, my best advice to you is to use those approximate grade boundaries from past linear papers, which you can download. If you search for Edexcel International GCSE grade boundaries, you'll find those online. So, yes, your earlier question, Aya, about calculating the grade. So let me just find the relevant page in the specification. If you have your specification downloaded, and it's the correct document, I believe, in your delegate pack, then on page 37 of the specification, it's actually the 43rd page of the PDF, then you have, and actually I can put the link in the chat just in case anyone has it. So page 37. So what this shows is that the maximum uniform mark for the qualification is 240. 120 uniform marks for each of the units. Unit 1, 120, Unit 2, 120. Now, the exam papers are actually out of 90, as you may know, but that mark out of 90 is scaled not just as a simple mathematical formula, but using a scaling formula which is unique to each paper, so that the grade boundary for grade 9, whatever it is, and it will be much less than 108 out of 120 as a percentage, but it will be converted to 108 UMS marks out of 120 if they've reached the mark that is equivalent to a grade 9. Now, we don't know what mark that will be. You can look at the linear exam grade boundaries for an idea, but that 108 out of 120, if they've achieved a grade 9 on Unit 1, that will be the uniform mark which goes forward to calculate their overall grade. So effectively, if they get, let's say they get 110 UMS marks on Unit 1, if they get 106 UMS marks on Unit 2, that will add up to 216 overall, and they will have a grade 9 for chemistry. If you can't open the delegate pack, you're not missing too much because due to my IT difficulties, I'm afraid you haven't got the correct slideshow or delegate pack in it. So sorry. However, we will send out the correct information. We'll make it available through the website, through the other channels that we've talked about. Hopefully you can download the specification that I've just been talking about. If you go back to my post in the chat a few moments ago. A question from Peter. Thank you, Peter, for your feedback. A question about the recording. If you use the same Zoom link that you used to join this meeting, it will soon take you to the download of the recording. That won't be immediate. There's a bit of work to do to modify and edit the recording after the meeting finishes. But if you were to try in a couple of days' time on Friday, then you should be able to download a recording then. Thank you so much for all of your excellent questions. I've got a list that I will refer back to, including ones about extraction of aluminium and blast furnaces and so on. And please do sign up for Subject Advisor updates on the qualification webpage to find out the answer to those, or join the Facebook group using the link that I put in the chat recently. Thank you.